Us everyone. Welcome back to the Kyokushin Shuffle. Thank you so much for everyone's love and support of late. And what a time we've been going through. Hey, here in Australia, we have just come out of lockdown in Melbourne, and then there's other states that are going through it. It is just an unbelievable time in this world. And, my guest here is on the other side of the world. He's in Tokyo, Japan. He's been living there for a number of years. We had him as a guest. We had him in the ebook of Forever the Student. Thank you so much again for your time, Sensei Sam Gilbert. How are you?
Oh, very well, mate. How are you?
Good. Thank you again for your time, building this Forever the Coach side of things and investing the angle now of not just the coach that supports us in punching and kicking, but mind you, you've been very successful in your career as such as in that level of on the mat. But this angle, I really wanted to tap into something really special about you and how you've encouraged people like me in a way in following you and your content, your book, your podcast, and such cool stuff that you've been doing also. So on this note and in this chat, like I shared with you earlier, we're going to tap into your professional career and all the tips and tricks and all the wonderful things that you've been sharing with a lot of karatekas and all martial artists from around, the traps in your profession. So give us a couple of moments here on your career as such in this side of it, and a bit of your karate, obviously, so everyone that hasn't watched that first episode with you gets an idea, and then let's deep dive.
Sure. And just before we do that, I just want to say congratulations on what you've achieved with the show. I think, how many episodes have you done now between
up to about 60 or 70 now, about 60 or 70, yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. And I think when you started doing it, it came at a great time. During the initial stages of COVID, everyone, a lot of the world was locked down, and everyone had a little bit more time to sort of contemplate and think about things. And I don't know, for me, it was really great listening to all the guests that you had on. I've listened to every episode and just hearing everyone's story about how they got into this. Because, when you're doing it for 30 years, you sort of forget what it was like when, yes, you're forever the student, but you forget what it was like to step into the dojo, have that wonder, that mystique that goes along with it. And I think as an instructor, you start thinking about the environment that your students are in and the experience that you're giving them. And, I sort of start thinking, what if one of my students that I'm training now ends up on, the Kyokushin Shuffle episode 1500? I'm sure you'll overtake Rogan at some point with Shihan Pat Pinto. And, how did you get into this? I was living in Japan. My parents were expats, and there was this Aussie guy who was over there teaching karate, and just, thinking about their experience and trying to put myself back in their shoes. And so that was a really cool part of it. And also just thinking a little bit more about karate, the martial art. For me, as we'll spend a lot of this chat talking about, for all of us, there is a sporting aspect of karate, and for me, I sort of took that as the main part, and then sort of based my whole career off that, in terms of sports performance and rehab and everything else that goes along with that. But it was almost a little bit, it's a bit cliche, but don't forget where you came from. Karate is what started this all for me, and sometimes you can get a little bit lost for me in the sports side. And it was good just listening to all the stories of the actual martial arts side. And we just talked off air about what Scott Heaney and Terry Burke are doing, talking about the sort of more of the martial arts side of Kyokushin. And I think that's just sort of sparked a little bit more of a revival of that side of things for me. For me, it's my occupation is in health and fitness and rehab and sports performance. But I can't forget where I came from, and thank you for reminding me that. And I appreciate all that you're doing, and I'm sure on behalf of the Kyokushin community and the wider martial arts community, thank you, and keep up the good work.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Sam. Good one.
Yeah. So, I think we talked about it on the last show, but ever since I started in karate, and probably even before, I was just fascinated by, physical performance and athleticism, and alongside my training in karate, I started weight training fairly early, and I was impressed not only by the martial arts abilities of the stars at the time, especially Van Damme and those guys, but also on their physiques, and wanted to get into that side as well. And then by the time I was sort of getting towards the end of high school, I was also equally fascinated in the concept of injury rehabilitation, and sort of as much as I loved hurting people and breaking people, the idea of fixing people was equally as mystifying, and so most people, by the time I finish school, don't really know what they want to do. And I think that the longer I go in life, the less I know what I want to be when I grow up. But I was pretty certain that I wanted to do physiotherapy and follow that route professionally. So I actually took a gap year after I finished high school, which I spent 6 months in Japan, just training full time. Then came back and started my uni degree. By the time I finished uni, I'd had 2 ACL reconstructions. I was for a 23-year-old, I was pretty beaten up, and so I didn't know how much longer I'd have to compete, and I wanted to make the most of my competition career while I could. So. Ended up coming to Japan, and I was in Japan for the last 7 years of my competitive career. During that time, I was working at a private physiotherapy practice run by some Australian expat physios here. Got to the end of my competitive career. I'd met my wife in that time in Japan, and we sort of decided that we liked the lifestyle out here and wanted to stay out here post my competitive career. So at that stage, I sort of embarked on 2 different projects. One was starting my master's, which I did via correspondence through Edith Cowan University in Perth. Did my master's in strength and conditioning in exercise science, and then also embarked on opening my own business. I'd sort of outgrown the practice that I was working in at the time. And my brother-in-law is a personal trainer, and it sort of made sense at that time for us to try and find a facility where we could do, the fitness side, we could do the rehab side, I could run karate classes from there. At that time, he was also working on my business partner, Nathan, was working on a white-collar boxing event. So if we could find a space where we could do the boxing training as well and leverage that. And, we were lucky enough to...
Unreal.
It was probably... When did we find it? It was probably 18 months after the earthquake, where the economic situation in Tokyo was still a little bit unstable. Stable enough that there was still a lot of business here, but, commercial property was a lot cheaper than it is now. We opened our second facility in... about 18 months ago, and we were paying, I think, almost 3 times the amount per square meter that we're paying for our current facility, where I'm sitting here. We were lucky enough to find a space, and we moved in at the start of 2013. So
well done.
Started Club 360. We've got enough branding here, and
nicely done.
We offer. Physiotherapy and osteopathy, massage on the sort of rehab side. We offer sort of personal training or sports performance stuff.
Very good.
Fitness classes, boxing, kickboxing. I do my classes out of here. Nutrition consultations. We're actually running a kids summer camp because the international schools are on their summer vacation at the moment. So
right.
In about 3 minutes. So if you hear a big group of children yelling in the background, that's going on there.
Well, listen, look at that. That's unbelievable. Well done. Nice summary. Good take on it. And I'm sure now the guests and listeners have a thorough understanding now what keeps yourself busy, and more so what you've been doing across in balancing everything, with karate as a fourth dan in Shinkyokushin and all the above. So, let's deep dive if you don't mind, because I know if I've got your time, I'm going to grab that knowledge as best I can. Now, there is, we can talk on, for those listening that are in the Kyokushin world, fantastic, put that into your perspective. But then when you listen to Sam, I'm sure he's going to be talking on a level of all martial arts / combat sports because of his expertise and experience. So a couple of questions that we're going to just trigger this off and get the ball rolling is, how are you seeing the karateke's body, the martial arts body, but more specifically, let's go into Kyokushin, the body physique of what you're seeing? And again, you're in Japan a lot, you're seeing a lot of obviously that type of body shape, that type of person, and what you've dealt with here in Australia, or what were some of the things that you're now seeing, or giving us a bit of a tip and a point to go, guys, spine's important, flexible, it's heading towards that angle. Where are your intel towards that type of future, towards what we should be aware of as well?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, because I guess in the sport that we're in, you have a massive variety of sort of body shapes and sizes. You know, if you take an average basketball player, average rugby player, they're all going to be, they're all going to have similar physical characteristics. Whereas if you take a cross section of some of the top karate fighters, Kyokushin fighters worldwide, there's some very different physiques. I think that is a good thing because it shows that you can leverage your genetics and your own sort of physical capabilities to the best of your ability and still be very successful. On the other side, though, it creates a little bit of a problem if you're prescribing training programs that are relatively generic in nature, that are meant to be tailored towards a large group of people. And there's obviously massive logistical challenges to countering that, because the way that we train, we're often in large groups, we're in classes. You can't be as tailored and as individualized as perhaps optimal. But there are probably some little things that we could change to help address that. And obviously, the more elite a competitor becomes, the more they should be looking into individualizing things, for themselves. So, I mean, in response to your original question, what am I seeing in the physiques of fighters? I mean, it like I said, it almost depends on region. In Japan, relatively short in stature, relatively low center of gravity, short limbs, which does aid in sort of power production. If you're a little bit lower to the ground, you can generate that sort. So when you're throwing a punch, you're basically needing to rotate the body and generate force from the ground up. And if there is a shorter distance from the hips to the legs, with potentially the same degree of muscle mass there to act on, that torque is going to be increased, and therefore you're going to potentially have a larger power output. But obviously, tactically that has its limitations as well. So if you're shorter, you don't have a reach advantage, and if you can leverage a reach advantage, as we've seen in any combat sports, that can be advantageous as well. I think in energy systems, you see those people that are extremely explosive, that maybe can't leverage that explosiveness over the course of a full round or full round and several extensions, for example, either because their energy system development is not optimized, or because of either a psychological issue, that basically go out too hard too quickly, or sort of a tactical issue, which is really the same thing. They don't basically know how to pace themselves. And then there's those people of workhorses that aren't particularly explosive, but can go for a long period of time. And again, some of that comes down to genetics, and some of it comes down to your training habits and how you go about training. I think you were sort of touching on more from an injury prevention perspective, and spine and range of motion and that type of thing.
Excuse my naiveness in the question, because you could go far and beyond, but it was kind of like along the lines of, if the listeners are out there going, should I, and again, you've just nailed it by that summary of going, see where you sit in this category, and then you're going to have to cater for it accordingly, right? And then where I was heading was, are you seeing that more attention should be focused on the upper body, the lower body? But if you put too much attention on the lower body, then it's affecting the upper body. And then, it's more towards that, because you see the trainings that the Kyokushin, did many, many moons ago. And we say that, but there's a lot of us that still do it to this day. We're squatting like, I use the expression like Tonka trucks, like Faraz Sahabi, GSP's coach, in one of the podcasts with Joe Rogan, says, Kyokushin or martial arts shouldn't be lifting like Tonka trucks. We should not just be focusing on heavy. We're a powerful art as such. We should be thinking more of a Ferrari, motor vehicle, smooth, fast, controlled, and all that type. It was alluding that type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to strength basically underpins all of our other characteristics. So without adequate strength, you can't have adequate power. But for every sport or for every individual activity, there is a point at which increasing levels of strength probably have diminishing returns in terms of power output. So you take someone who can back squat 1.5 times body weight, which is sort of the metric I use in the book. Now, it's funny. I started writing the book maybe 7 years ago and finished 2018. So some of the things that are in the book, I've changed my thoughts on a little bit. But I guess, in terms of strength measurements, squat, bench, and deadlift are the ones that are most widely accepted, and the ones that everyone seems to understand. Most people that are resistance trained have a decent idea of how much they can lift in those sort of lifts. So if you are lifting 1.5 times body weight and you put a lot of effort into increasing that to 2 times body weight, how much benefit is that going to give you in terms of your power output? Now, if you have to collide into someone very hard in rugby or in American football, I know even in rugby, a lot of the coaches say maybe 1.6, 1.7 times body weight is probably sufficient. You may need to be a little bit stronger, but really for what we're doing, we need to have adequate strength to produce power in kicks and also to push off the ground to generate power into our punches. Now, there's a group out of the UK called Boxing Science. I'd recommend everyone jump on. They've got some great resources on their YouTube and Instagram pages. So shout out to those guys. And they explain things in a pretty simple manner. But they've done some research with boxers and specifically, so we've got a few studies from a while back. The first one, I think from 1984, from Filipovic, something like that, out of Russia, that showed that the higher level competitive you are, the more your hip and core and leg strength contributes to the power in the punch. The Boxing Science guys were the first guys who actually looked at hypertrophy, so muscle mass in those areas, and they showed that an increase in muscle mass in the upper body doesn't really translate to increased punching power, whereas an increase in muscle mass in the lower body probably does. So I think that strength and hypertrophy work in the lower body is definitely has its place, but you've got to look at how someone is using that strength to generate power. A pretty simple test you can use is a vertical jump and seeing what someone's vertical jump is like. But first of all, their raw score, how high they can jump, but also the difference between how high they're jumping if they sort of pause at the bottom and jump up, which we call a squat jump, and if they sort of dip down and explode back up, which we call a counter movement jump. So the counter movement jump tests the ability to harness that stretchiness, if you like, of the lower limbs. And say, for example, if you do a counter movement jump of 50 centimeters and a squat jump of 40, my maths is probably going to be all over the place here. That gives you what we call an eccentric utilization ratio of 1.25, which is very high, which is very springy. And so that's probably someone that needs to spend a little bit more time increasing their sort of more force capacity, their strength. Whereas if your squat jump and your counter movement jump aren't really that different, then you probably need to spend a little bit more time developing that sort of springiness. As far and there's also been some studies correlating the power at lower levels of or lower intensities of the squat, so like 30%, has a high degree of correlation with success in combat sports. So having a combination of heavy strength work, but also explosive work performed at light loads is important. And we can sort of organize our training in different ways. Again, in my book, I'm very much a sort of block periodization model where you might spend 4 to 6 weeks working on your max strength. And then once you've increased that, then you can track that into power. But that has sort of been a traditional model of periodization. However, there are other ways to do it. And I'm sort of, with my own training now, using more of what we call a conjugate approach. So doing more explosive work on earlier in the week, and then later in the week doing more sort of heavy strength work. And there's some gadgets and gizmos. Like, I love my toys. When I do spend money, I spend it on sort of training related gadgets and gizmos. And what I'm using at the moment, which if you have a look at my Instagram, you can see the Yeah, the what we call a linear position transducer, which actually tells you how fast that bar is moving. And so on my explosive days, I'm doing squats and deadlifts, but sort of keeping them above 0.65 meters a second. So really sort of working on that speed and explosiveness. So, yeah, I mean, in short, I think that in strength levels, the lower body in particular, I think that needs to be optimized. Upper body strength, I mean, if you're bench pressing 70% of your body weight, you can probably afford to optimize that a little at least, so you're bench pressing body weight and even up to sort of 1.25. But I think if you're bench pressing 1.25 times body weight, again, like the squat example, if you sort of take that to 1.5 times body weight, so say if you're an 80 kilo person and you're benching 100 kilos, if you bring your bench press up to 120 kilos, the actual return on that investment is probably not that large.
Right. Good.
Really and you did sort of, again, mention like flexibility and range of motion there. I think that's an area where that can be individualized as well. So again, in a class environment, we're all sort of guilty of this. You'll go through your warm up. Everyone will sort of have their standardized warm up, and then at the end, everyone will do the same stretches, and that's sort of the easy way to do it. But if you find out what people actually need to work on in terms of their mobility, then we can sort of target mobility interventions more individualized as well. So, someone might spend a ton of time stretching their hamstrings, but if you've got super long hamstrings, if you can lie on your back and pull your leg up towards you, in our sport, optimizing that may have a little bit of a carryover to increase performance if we're thinking about techniques that actually involve that, like a kakatotosh or something like that. But the person who has very good range of motion in their hamstrings probably has restricted range of motion in their hip flexors, and that range of motion restriction might be impeding their ability to actually involve the hips into a punch, and then maybe influencing their punching power.
And it goes on.
So in my book, I do go through assessments, and I do have videos. I don't have videos of the assessments. I have pictures of the assessments, range of motion assessments, and then later in the book, it has a chapter on flexibility training, because for some people, stretching can be very effective. For others, it might not be effective. And when I have an athlete or a patient, I apply a bit of an algorithm to find out what the most effective range of motion intervention is to address their flexibility, and then sort of design the program around that. But going through a quick screen of someone's range of motion doesn't really take that long. And if you're an instructor and you have a personal trainer who knows how to do this stuff, or a physiotherapist, you can strike some sort of a deal, get your student screen, so you have some idea of what of where their range of motion restrictions are. And then you could sort of say at the end of the class, okay guys, so instead of everyone doing stretches together, you have your tailored mobility program, go and do that. And even the same with the warm-up, you can sort of individualize a warm-up as well.
Fascinating. Have a breather. That's awesome. That's exactly what I was envisaging. As I watch everyone kind of do this, like, whoa. And that's impressive, Sam, and I appreciate that. And I know you're just, as they say, scratching the surface of just a bullshit naive question that I was just trying to start the ball rolling, but I knew it would get you going. I knew it. Well, in giving you a bit of a breather here, what I feel that this topic and someone, how do I share this a bit openly with everyone? Because I try to leave it to the guest, but the reason I got a Sam on, and the reason why I want to do Forever the Coach, is there's a lot of instructors in our age and demographic now, right? We've hit that cycle where we're all enthusiastic, and we've learned so much from our Shihans and Hunchies and whatnot, and we've kept that flame. I can not talk, I'm talking on behalf of me. I keep that flame alive, yet we still have to continue to evolve and adapt and learn from people like you and people like X and Y and what they've been through and what they know. And I feel that in Kyokushin, and again, I'm talking on behalf of myself, this part of the yin yang, or whichever word you want to use of martial arts or combat, is everyone loves getting on the mat. Everyone knows now how to, get to training or do the work that needs to be done. The other side of it is what I wanted you to teach us and guide us as a coach towards, and, with your experience in going, hey, it's all, because it can be all well and good to train as hard as you want. And then it comes down to a thing, and you're using some of the words, and it's how you measure things, So there's some out there that don't want to measure a thing, and there's some that are doing all the things that you've mentioned: squats, bench press, flexibility. How are they managing this part of their body? Are they adjusting to the needs and wants that they've got for themselves? Should they be doing it after training, before training? So all these things are part of why I wanted to get you on, because I knew you'd just blow it out the park. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So on that side, you've gestured your book, and let's go into that, because in creating this monster of a thing of your book, and that's The Science of Striking, for all those out there, jump on. I'm sure we'll plug it a bit later, where to get it via Sam and so forth. All those years of research, study, reading, writing, testing, trialing, assessing, how did you know where to start, and how did you know where to end in that book? Do you know what I mean? Like, how did you go, oh, shit, and then how did you plan all that? How did that come about?
Yeah. So I felt that at the time there wasn't a lot sort of published in terms of combat sports. Okay. There's been a few good books published since, but 2014 there wasn't a lot out there. So I thought that, and especially for the full contact karate community, I felt like I had a lot of info that people would benefit from, and it's a chance to give back too. Like karate's given me everything in life. I am in Japan because I have a very successful business and career because of it. I came to Japan and then ended up meeting my wife here. So I sort of give, and even just earlier than that, going through karate as a kid and getting all the benefits in terms of discipline. And, I had to work very hard during high school to get into physiotherapy. It's a popular degree in Australia. And the discipline and hard work and all that, that also all came from karate. So, I thank my Shihan and everyone I've had the pleasure of being involved with and influenced by for everything that's given me. And it's so I felt like the book was a chance for me to give back. Right. So, but I wasn't expecting it to become what it became. I wanted to do a simple sort of ebook, and I started I think September 2014, and my wife fell pregnant with our first child in November 2014, and it's like, all right, well, I've got to wrap this up before Bubs comes along, because I'm not going to have any time then, and ended up getting it released after our second child was born 4 years later. So it just like you said, it became a monster. It's the more I wrote, the more I realized that there was more to write. And then I kept sort of adding chapters. I got to the end and it's like, actually, I haven't really done that much on injury prevention and injury management. And so I wrote that chapter, then talked about concussion, and then a few other sort of chapters at the end of the book. And then compiling the exercise database. At that stage within our business, we had a lot of videos recorded that we use for our patients and clients for their reference. Gotcha. I included all of those in the book, basically as a hyperlink in the Kindle version and as a QR code in the printed version. But where to stop? I just sort of got to the stage where I needed to stop. I could be writing it. I could still be writing it now. And if I didn't sort of put like a definitive end on it, then I'd still be writing it now, and I could very easily write a second edition. I don't have time to do that right now, but there's stuff in there that I would like to expand upon and change a bit. It was.
I'm gonna go into an area now which will make you probably go, really? Like, come on, mate, give me something more. But I feel that, again, for most of martial artists, karatekas, all that type of that are listening here, to get a physio's time, as they say, physio costs X amount, I won't go, and all these things. Let's talk injury prevention and try, and again, appreciate your tips and thoughts here, and more so referencing what people should be doing according to some of these things I'm about to say. An injury towards, our hamstring. An injury meaning, the hamstring. Karate, pretty common. The hamstring in whatever way has been done. Now, the naive instructor as such, put some ice on it, put it up, that type of talk, because we've got to keep teaching, or come on, mate, move over there and just deal with it, or we'll see you back next week. What's your take? And again, I know you can go into so many degrees of the injury and so forth. What are some of the tips if someone had done that or has questioned it to you? They've walked into your physio and gone, listen, I do Kyokushin, my hamstring. I'm in a world of hurt here. Where would you flow on from there?
Yep. So hamstring injuries in our sport are a little bit different to what we see in sprinting. So the mechanism is slightly different. So with things like ballet, I'm just trying to think of other sports where we see this sort of stretch-induced hamstring strain. It's slightly different, and it actually takes a little bit longer. So if you tear your hamstring sprinting, you can make a little bit quicker return than you can if it's a sort of stretched-induced. So if you did a high kick and you felt it go, then you may be looking at a slightly longer recovery. Right. And accurate diagnosis at the time is important. So I think
this is where I'm getting
taking the time to taking the time to see a medical professional is important, because
of course
there's different grades of muscle injury.
Yes,
the traditional grading sort of been 1, 2, 3. There's different extrapolations of that, but you can ascertain the degree of strain by how much you can stretch that muscle before you start to reproduce someone's symptoms, and also by the amount that you can contract the muscle without reproducing the symptoms. And that will sort of guide how long the recovery is going to be. The average recovery for a sprinting-based hamstring strain is about 18 days. But I think with the stretch-induced strain, you're looking more sort of towards a 3 to 4 week mark or longer.
Gotcha. So what would be the two? What would and I don't mean to do that, cut you off, but what would be the two? What would be the pre-thing in taking care of the hamstring, and then the post thing? And again, excuse my medical terms there. The pre, like, hey, how we're like, you should be stretching the hamstring solidly before class, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. What is it? What is the pre thing that you want to give us a tip on, and what is the post way of, taking care of the hamstring as well? Because they're a massive part of our game.
Sure. Yeah. And don't do that. Don't go stretching it before class. So when you apply a static stretch for a muscle, you do acutely decrease the force output of that muscle. Now, for a long time, we sort of everything in our world, or my world in fitness and rehab, goes in pendulums. So years ago, we used to do a bunch of static stretching before training, and then these studies showed that there was an acute decrease in force output with static stretching. So the pendulum swung all the way the other way and said you should never static stretch before any sort of physical activity, because it's going to decrease force and cause injury. As with everything, the pendulum's starting to come a little bit back more towards the center where it should be. There's probably nothing wrong with static stretching before training, especially if someone is relatively inflexible in a muscle group that is going to be put through a certain range of motion with that activity. But you're probably going to get more bang for your buck with more active stretching, which is essentially what we do in a karate class. We do our Mai Kyage, our Yoko Kyage, all that sort of stuff is great. So let me just jump to the post injury, and then I'll come back to talk about pre-injury. Because I think that we can maybe talk about pre-injury or injury prevention just as an overall concept, and then maybe just go a little bit more in detail into the hamstring.
Awesome.
But post hamstring strain, often with a grade 1 strain, these are the strains that will feel a lot better within a couple of days. And so they're what people will just then associate with tightness, right? Or I think the term in Australia with the footy players is hamstring awareness, whatever.
Right.
Exactly. Now, I do a separate thing to the podcast where we get listeners' questions, and if we don't have listeners' questions, we'll make them up and make up some names. We talked about the difference between pain and tightness and stiffness a couple of weeks ago. Again, this is on my socials if you want to have a look. Because I think that what someone that was a clinician like myself perceives as tightness, or the concept of tightness is very different from what most people think about of tightness. And people think of tightness and pain as very different things. And a tightness is something that it's just a bit tight, and I just need to stretch it out. Whereas pain is something that's wrong, something's injured. I look at it really just as a continuum. So when someone has a tight hamstring, for example, then they're usually not going to know that they've got a tight hamstring. They're just going to, if they kick a certain level, they're not going to be able to kick that way. If you pull their leg up, they're just not going to go that far. But they're not necessarily going to think it's tight. I've had people that come in saying, oh, my hamstrings are so tight. And you get them on the table and they've got like 120, 130 degrees of range of motion. Wow. That's not a tight hamstring. The problem there is probably that they're overusing their hamstring, or either because they're weak in that area, or because they're weak somewhere else, and that's putting more stress on the hamstring. And so when people start stretching these tight muscle, or inverted commas tight muscles, then they can often be making matters worse. So then often if you stretch a tight thing too much, it can start to become pain. The same thing with stiffness. Like I've got a couple of clients that say, oh, no, my knee's fine, it's just stiff, it's not sore. Sure. And then they sort of continue pushing into that stiffness and start causing some joint irritation, and then it actually does become pain. So if you apply that same sort of thinking post hamstring injury, and you start stretching that hamstring that's not really ready to be stretched, then you're just sort of continuously poking the bear. It's almost like having a sore tooth and just sort of poking at it. Yeah. It sort of feels like it needs to be poked, but it's not really helping the problem.
Gotcha.
So the one thing we want to avoid is stretching in the early stages. Muscle tears respond well to early loading. So we might, if it's a grade 1 strain, get that person doing some contractions of that muscle. So it's just sort of maybe bending the knee, or doing some bridges lying on the back, lifting the hips up, just getting some load through the muscle at a pain level that they can tolerate and that doesn't make it worse. There was some a study done out of Melbourne by Jack Hickey, who's a professor researcher at La Trobe University, where I actually did my undergrad, but he did a study on AFL football players with hamstring tears, comparing one group that avoided pain completely with their ACL rehab, with their hamstring rehab, and another group that pushed into pain. And it showed there was actually no difference in terms of the outcomes, in terms of return to sport and pain and performance. So you can push into a little bit of pain with a muscle injury. It's the sort of stretching and the tearing of the muscle apart that we don't want. So we will basically gradually increase the load on that muscle. So we might go from a single leg bridge to a two-leg bridge to a single leg bridge, and all different sort of hamstring exercises, curling type exercises. And then if it was a running athlete, we would ease them back into running. Now, we might actually get them doing some sort of running drills quite early on. With hamstring tears in footballers, they've shown that if you get them just sort of doing some sidestepping drills, even as soon as day 2 or 3, if they can tolerate it, that's going to get them back running sooner because they're already practicing that locomotive pattern. But by sidestepping, they're not really using the hamstring, so they can do it without flaring things up. Gotcha. For a karate athlete who needs to kick high, you need to be a little bit more specific with that strengthening. So actually getting them to start strengthening that muscle through a longer range of motion. So something like a Romanian deadlift, where you're just getting a slight bend in the knees, but you're getting most of that movement through the hips. You're getting into a large range of motion, but you're doing that in a controlled strengthening fashion. And then maybe progressing that to something like a single leg deadlift, which is one of my favorite exercises. Gotcha. And then you'd start, if they can tolerate that range of motion under a slow controlled load, then you'd start implementing more what we call your ballistic exercises. So doing more your Maikiyage, those sort of stretching kicks, increasing the speed, increasing the volume, and then at the same time starting to get them kicking and making sure that they can tolerate that kicking load, and then you just gradually build up the load, and then very good. And it really needs to be criteria based. So whilst we do have general time frames with certain exercises, you can't just rest a hamstring for 4 weeks and say, okay, we're good, you've done your 4 weeks, get back out there. It's criteria based. So it could be 2 2 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, but you need to sort of tick off milestones along the way. You can do a 2-legged bridge, great. 1-legged bridge. You can do a 1-legged bridge. All right, let's add some load. Okay. You can do a hamstring curl at this amount. Okay. Once you can do hamstring curl the same as the other side, then we're going to start your kicking. So you need to be sort of ticking off this criteria.
Very good.
So that's sort of in brief how we would manage a hamstring injury.
I appreciate it again. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
Go for it.
In terms of prevention, I think that for karateka in particular, and I guess it's probably the same across all combat sports, we're very what we call anterior chain dominant. And I think that's just because of the way we train and the facilities that we've got available. We've usually just got mats and a large open area. So the easiest stuff to do is push-ups and squats. So we're using more of the front, not as much of the back, right? So if, from upper body point of view, if dojos can have something like a TRX or some bands and stuff where we can actually get some pulling, some rowing work in, that's really important. The same for the upper body, doing some specific sort of hamstring and glute work will help with decreasing the likelihood of a hamstring strain. Some exercises are what we call a Nordic curl, which is where that was so basically someone's kneeling, you're holding, you're either having a partner hold on to your legs and then lowering down. And this is a really good one to do. You can do that in a class, partner up with someone, and you can alternate doing the Nordics that way. That is a fairly high level exercise, but even including some bridges and things like that within the class, building up to that might be a way that you can do that. Spending a couple of minutes doing, or for the people who are spending some time at the gym outside their karate training, then getting in some decent hamstring strengthening there as well.
Very good.
I guess, are you okay if I sort of go talk about just injury prevention?
Keep going. You're on fire. I'm loving it. Great lecture.
What I'll actually, you mentioned the word lecture there. Are you okay if I share something on the screen?
Yeah. Can you?
Actually, can you just go to
you want me to?
Settings, and if you can just, I think, make me a co-host or enable me to share, and I can just pop.
You're now the host.
Perfect. Well, I have got the better mic today, so I probably should.
Yeah, all good. Go for it.
Sorry.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll chat. So as you can see, listeners, and see meaning or hearing, kind of get why I wanted Sam to have a chat to us. Invaluable stuff. I mean, I can't encourage everyone enough to go and jump on his socials. I mean, he's putting a lot of content on there. And again, it's giving back. There's no doubt you can see it in that manner. And again, like my Shion used to say to me, if you can take one thing out of someone saying, showing you something, doing something, man, that's a win. That is a massive nugget in life. Just one thing. And seeing Sensei Sam do a certain exercise or just talking about something, and if I get the window, 10 minutes in the car by myself, whatever, just try and make that time to, again, you're not going to need to be an expert like Sensei is in this field. There's no chance in hell, but, he's there as a reference for all of us in Kyokushin. He loves to help people, and he's putting it out there. So I hope that helps. Go for it, Sam. This is cool. Go.
Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Sure can.
Cool. All right. So this is something I actually put on socials in the next week or so. But this is what I sort of think about in terms of like an injury prevention hierarchy. So at the bottom, at the base of that pyramid, you've got your training load management and your recovery. And I think for me, the best recovery modality we have is sleep. It's better than any sort of ice pack, massage gun, all of the stuff that we've sort of got at the top of the pyramid there. But the training load management is really key, and we'll come back to that in a second. Next up is sort of movement optimization, and by movement optimization, I'm sort of talking about your sort of biomechanics, the way that we move, and that might be tightness and stiffness or weakness in certain areas that are maybe increasing focal load on certain areas of the body. And also our nutrition and our sort of strength and conditioning. So, I still think that, any athlete should be doing a base level of strength training work. Like I said, you can incorporate into your class in just, little bite-sized pieces, but doing something is important. Where we go up higher up, or which way are you talking about? Lower, pyramid. We get to the stuff that's less important, but it's probably more popularized and probably what most people think of in terms of like trying to prevent injury, which is things like stretching, which we talked about before, things like massage. You know, there's we have massage guns here and we sell them, but we use them in context with the individual but there's people there that, you know, something's feeling a bit sore, I'll just get the massage gun on it for 5 minutes and I'm all good to go and I'm out. The same with hot and cold and compression. These things can be valuable interventions. There's some nuance with how we might use hot and cold because there's some times where we might not want to use them. And then there's sort of all the bullshit that the little fancy inventions that
voodoo magic. I see you though. That's funny.
So that's sort of the way I approach it. And I'm just going to share another screen here. That's cool. So when we talk about training load can take a lot of different forms. And
look at this.
This is, So this is from a course that we're actually at the moment, hopefully in over the summer, it's already the summer, hopefully sometime this year, launching an online fitness education platform in English and Japanese here. And this is from one of the courses, which is called Training the Injured Client. And this is basically, the whole course revolves around this concept of total load. So I sort of, and this is this is taken from other people's models, but it's the way I put it together is sort of my beliefs in the way that I approach this. So we've got these quadrants: tissue-specific load, direct load, systemic load, and indirect load. So at the top, we've got our activity load and tissue stress, and this is the actual direct stress on a tissue. So if we're talking about the hamstrings, that's the number of kicks thrown that put a lengthening stress on that hamstring. If we're talking about a hand injury, you know, how many punches or actually how hard we're punching, that's causing a direct stress to the bone or the joint. And that's sort of that direct load. When we're talking about indirect tissue-specific load, we're talking about biomechanics and technique. Sorry, technique is what I didn't mention in sort of the second step up in that pyramid. If your technique is shitty, then you're also setting yourself up for injury. And I think every instructor inherently knows that. He's aware of that. So technique is important. And technique also comes into it. If you're not very economical with your technique, you tend to use a lot of energy, then you're going to be putting yourself into a fatigued state and again setting yourself up for injury. Down the bottom here we've got indirect systemic load. So this is things like general health, sleep, nutrition, and then beliefs and influences of others. And this is we could sort of talk forever on this, but if you have an injury, the information that you're getting from other people is going to influence the pain that you're experiencing. So pain is essentially an alarm, and it's an alarm that goes off in response to some sort of threat. And that threat can be a real threat or it can be a perceived threat. And so if you have a back injury and you go and see a doctor and they take a scan and they show this horrible disc bulge and they say that's what's causing your pain, you see that on the scan and you freak out, you look up Dr. Google, they'll tell you all bad shit and so your threat value associated with that injury is raised. And because pain is a response to a perceived threat, our pain goes up as well. So that's an important part to consider. And then there's this systemic load, which is overall training load. So not just load on a specific tissue that we're associating with an injury, but the overall load of our training. And also psychological stress. So, you know, if we're under greater psychological stress and anxiety, which a lot of us have been under over the last 18 months, then that's all going to play into it as well. So if you do exactly the same training, everything's the same, you're eating the same stuff, but you know, you just got fired from your job, or you broke up with your girlfriend. And you wonder why you're getting injured. It's that psychological stress that all plays into it. So coming back to training load, which is probably the easiest thing for us as instructors and athletes to conceptualize, we want to try and have some consistency in our training load. We see training-related injury happen when there's spikes in our training load. Now, if you're a runner, just get rid of this stop share. That's so runners will be familiar with the 10% rule. So, you know, if you increase your running mileage by 10% a week, rather than increasing it more than that, then you're decreasing the likelihood of a running-related injury. In team sports, they've had what they call a acute versus chronic workload ratio. That sounds complicated, but when you actually look at the maths, it is quite easy. You're basically taking the average weekly training load for the 4 weeks prior. So say if you do 5 hours of training at a certain intensity, that's your average. Your chronic workload is 5 hours, and say 1 week you do 10 hours of training. Your acute versus chronic workload ratio then shoots up to 2, okay? 10 divided by 5. In the studies that they've done with, especially in rugby and soccer, which is where this research comes from, they've shown that if you're over about 1.35, 1.4, then you're increasing your risk of injury by about 2-fold. Now, this was super popular when I was writing my book. There was nothing on martial arts at the time. There's a chap, I think his name's Tim Travail. He's a POM, but lives in Melbourne. He's a sports scientist and BJJ instructor. He wrote his master's thesis on this and trying to apply it to combat sports, but there's no direct research on combat sports.
Okay.
And so that metric has fallen out of favor a little bit because we've found that it doesn't apply universally across all sports and all populations. It applies relatively well to professional rugby, but how that applies to karate, we're not sure. However, the concept, whether the metric is valid or not, the concept is very valid. If you have acute spikes in your training workload, then you're setting yourself up for injury. And not just injury, it's not like you do your 10 hours of training this week and at the end of the week you pop a hamstring. The injuries that occur related to spikes in workload have been shown to occur even a month to 2 months after that spike. So it's important to be consistent. And so the easiest way to do this is basically every session you do, write down how many hours you trained for and your perceived rate of exertion for that training session. So by that, I just meant how hard it was. And they recommend you get a more accurate score for this about 20 minutes after the session finished, because you finish your session, you're knackered, it's a 10.
Yes.
But
yes.
if you cool down, reflect on that session, how hard was it really, and then you multiply it. So say you did a 75-minute session at I'm going to use 10 RPE because my maths isn't good enough to calculate anything else on the fly. So that would give you 750 units of load. So there's no special, we just call it arbitrary units of load. A lot of this comes from another Aussie researcher named Tim Gabbett, who's done all this work in rugby. Brilliant guy. Look up his stuff if you're more interested in this stuff. Again, I did write on it in the book as well. But you take that arbitrary unit of load and then you take that over the course of the week. And then you sort of monitor that over the course of several weeks and you just see if there's any patterns. What's that doing over the course of a month or two? And if it's going up and up and up and up, if it's going up gradually, then that's fine. You can't just have a linear progression of intensity and training volume. You do need to have periods where you sort of undulate that, maybe go hard for 3 weeks, off for a week. But I think also the other thing is after a tournament, what's your training looking like then? I was guilty of this. I would train like a demon up into the tournament. And then afterwards, I would continue training, but I was training probably like 30% of the volume. And plus I was inducing other stresses by going out and drinking and all that sort of stuff, which is a normal pattern. And yes, you do need to recover after a tournament, but you do need to keep a base level of conditioning, because if you drop down to 30%, you've got a long way to go to build back up to the 100% or even the 105% that you need to keep progressing from tournament to tournament. I guess this concept comes from the UFC Performance Institute. They've got their Vegas and Shanghai locations. For those who really want to geek out on some of this sports science stuff related to combat sports, the UFC PI have just released I think it's like a 500-page, they call it a journal. It's not really a journal, but it's a summary of their processes, and it's really cool.
How good. They've released it free of charge.
free of charge, which is amazing. And apparently I've been in contact with some of the people that work there, and they're like, we don't get paid for this, seriously. But that's what they want. They want to improve the sport. That's what they're all about. And they've got a shit ton of money anyway. So it's not like that.
How could they? Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so check that out. But Forrest Griffin, who's the head of MMA there, and Duncan French, who's the director of the place, they talk in terms of a 52-week fight camp. And I think that's a good way to be. Not that you're training for a fight, the 52 weeks, but you're thinking about it, you're preparing about it the whole time. After you finish that fight, you go into a transition mode when obviously the intensity, the volume is going down, but you're maintaining some level of training so that when you go back to training, you build up to the next fight camp, you're not having to go from a low base and build back up again. So training load is the key. If there's one sort of takeaway from this, and like you said, if you can pick up one thing from a course or a training session, I do a lot of continuing education, and I might read through an entire book and pick up one nugget that I'm going to apply to my practice. And if I can do that, it's well worth hours spent reading that book or doing the course or listening to a podcast or whatever it is. But training load management is the key. You can do all the stretching and icing and voodoo magic that you want, but if your training load is out and you're sleeping like shit, you really are increasing your chances of getting injured and decreasing your likelihood of optimizing performance. So, that's...
How cool. Have a breather. That was awesome. Really, really cool. And I know something like this for you is water off a duck's back, respectfully, and that's, I guess it was a starting point to get all of us, that listen to the podcast, to listen to the shuffle, to go, okay, it's been great to hear all these other guests that have given us all these insights across multiple things. And this is what I wanted. Exactly. I appreciate that immensely, Sam. Thank you for that as well.
No problem. I love talking about it, as you can tell. So it's my passion. And like I said, I want to try and give back to the art and the sport that's given me so much. So I just hope some people can take some points out of that and apply it to their training.
Well, fantastic. So, Sam, I'll give you the floor to, again, you've got a lot of things that you're doing. Share those platforms with everyone now, because I'd love for the listeners to go, shit, that was awesome. How do I get a hold of him? What can I watch more? And all of us educate, ourselves through you.
Sure. Yeah. So I spend a fair bit of time on Instagram. I sort of post on there most days. A mixture of so I'm to do a weekly sweep of the journal articles, research related to combat sports, and I sort of usually post once a week on a review of an article. I share exercises. I share just training tips and information. I'm also sharing a lot of just resources that I'm listening to, reading on a daily basis. So that's probably the best place to get in touch, and I'm happy to accept PMs through there as well. My YouTube channel has got all the video content, and my website. So the YouTube channel is just The Science of Striking. The website is thescienceofstriking.com. Instagram, Science of Striking. Twitter is Striking Science. Facebook, Science of Striking. It probably get less content up on there than the Instagram. And then the book is also The Science of Striking on Amazon. We've got Kindle and paperback versions of that there. So, if anyone wants to get in touch,
that's with awesome. Me, there you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time again. We look forward to seeing the response to what people think of this chat, because there is all of us guilty as charged across a whole bunch of little topics that we just spoke about. And look how in depth it just got to in regards to just injury prevention and a couple of tricks here and there in lower body load, upper body load. I'm sure we're all guilty towards something, but let's learn from Sam, Sensei Sam, in respect of this. And don't be, and in having the forever the coach concept, it's continue to learn, keep moving, keep learning, keep growing is my thing. Don't be stubborn enough to kind of go in respect of, no, you're fine. You're not hurt. What's your problem? Come on, you're good. And then the Kyokushin shuffle continues to fucking drag on for 9 years for certain individuals. And we don't want that. We don't want that. And we can see it in our Shihans in a way, respectfully, as much as they trained and inbuilt the training load towards students like ourselves. But we've got a lot of research, a lot of knowledge, and Sensei put his book out took him a period of time, and now there's already adjustments and tweaks and changes according to what he's seeing out every single day. So we have to be open to that conversation, don't we all? So thank you, Sensei Sam. We really appreciate your time.
No, my pleasure, mate. It was a lot of fun, and hope to do it again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Look forward to something. I'm working on something pretty special. I've got a personal friend of mine that's at the Olympic Games coming up very soon. Hint, hint, for those that kind of know him or don't know him. He wants to come on the shuffle. He said, he's like, why haven't you asked me to be on the shuffle? Well, Joe Ingles has been asked to come on the shuffle, so I'm hoping to get him pretty soon. We'll get him. He's a very good, close friend of mine. Was part of his wedding party and so forth. So he'll be off to the Olympic Games for the Australian Boomers. And he said we'll get a bit of his time. He's in LA at the minute. So whoever's listened to that bit and stayed on to listen to the last part of this episode will be looking forward to that. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate your time. Big awesome. Everyone.
All right. Thanks, mate. Awesome.